Thank you. Thank you. Okay, now we've had four opening statements. Dr. Agard talked about long-term trends for the future, meteorological trends, followed by Evud Histerman, who encouraged us to treat our drainage problems as being and have solutions which enhance the environment and do better than what we have done in the past. And Tyrone Sutherland gave us an exposition of the current state of affairs with respect to meteorology and its monitoring around the world, followed by Zafar Khan, which indicated some of the gaps we have in the Caribbean society for deterring problems when we have issues. I'm glad that he mentioned insurance, because it's a very important, in fact, the largest property insurance company in the world, insuring industrial and commercial properties, is FM Global. And FM Global is unique. I didn't say very unique, you can't be very unique. It's unique. It's an insurance company that is headed by an engineer that employs 5,200 people, of whom 3,000 are engineers. It's an insurance company, the only insurance company in the world that does not employ an actuary. Because they say the actuary tells you what happened in the past, but engineers tell you what you need to do to affect what will happen in the future. So that's what we need. We are small island developing states, and there's one characteristic of small island developing states is that they have very low redundancy. Typically, they have one major airport, sometimes only one major seaport, and in some cases only one major referral hospital. Trinidad has more than one. So we have very low redundancy, as distinct from men in Islamic communities who have very high redundancies in marital relationships. So we ironically, poor, small island developing states need to have higher standards than rich continental communities because of the low redundancy. So now I open the floor to contributions.
Thank you. An observation from Dominica, where I was born and where I just was on a year-long assignment. I'm putting into the public something that is not well talked about. Dominica has one single cargo port. When it was designed, it was for a certain size of vessel, maybe about 40,000 tons. They're now tying up vessels at about 140,000 ton cruise ships. Having gone under the jetty with the executive director of Port Authority, chief technical officer of works, the structure itself is in a very fragile condition. Some of the hollow piles, which were originally underdesigned to begin with, have been completely separated by corrosion. They no longer exist. I won't bore you with details of the actual structure. One bad berthing impact may be sufficient to render that jetty inoperable. There will be no other gateway for heavy cargo into Dominica, basically. To me, that is some of the kind of other stuff in terms of infrastructural fragility and lack of recovery capability, lack of redundancy, which face the island. I just throw that in just to say this is the kind of thing that is happening in real time in the islands. And I've already warned them while there that this is a major challenge facing an economy that by all accounts is on some aspects of life support.
One of the things Dr. Osborne is highlighting is the need for preventative maintenance.
Absolutely.
I see a hand over there. Excuse me, could you please give your name and your affiliation.
I'm Billy Alwalia from CH Durham Hill. We are a firm of consulting engineers, global firm. I'm going to direct my question to Tyrone Sutherland, who gave us a good presentation on what monitoring is being done, not only locally but globally. So my question is, with all this monitoring, could you please tell us what advanced warnings we could expect from the monitoring that you do?
Thanks. In the presentation, I anticipated that sort of question. In the presentation, I pointed out a couple of things. One, when I was showing a satellite loop, I just was pointing to a little sort of a feature. And I also wanted to point out at the end when I put a block over the Caribbean and no data. One of the biggest problems we have in the world is that we have 71% of the globe is water. And getting information over the water is, even though we have a lot of systems, it really isn't sufficient. So if you have any area of that's lacking in data, it reflects instantly in your solutions. And so the more data you have, the better your solutions, right? Having said that, it is a constant challenge to observe and predict very accurately in the tropical areas. We monitor, we can see things, but monitoring is now. The key thing is the prediction 24, 48 hours in advance. But once the system is there, we have more and more systems to see it. We have these new radars, we have satellites all the time. But it's the predictive part that's where our weakness is. And we have weaknesses in Africa, I pointed out, because of the lack of data in Africa. And to us, the east of the Caribbean was the closest to Barbados, Africa. So if we have a lot of data, we have good information. If we don't, these are the weaknesses that we have to live with. We have no choice. I mentioned that because I wanted to point out a little thing about the Christmas Day storm in St. Vincent, Dominic, and so on. And here, all the numerical guidance that was shown all suggested that this blow-up of systems would have occurred to the west of the islands, not over the islands. And that is primarily because there is a lack of data to the west of the islands, and so on. And I use that because it was a very simple system that crossed the islands and interacted with another one right over the islands. 50 miles of difference and it would have been sunshine. So yes, we can monitor, but this is a far from perfect science, because it's the more information you have, the better you are. As soon as you have any deficiencies, then you have deficiencies in your output. So I hope that answers the question. But we really do have a lot of monitoring. We have 6 Doppler weather radars. My organization has put in 5 in the last few years. And one in Jamaica, which has been there a little longer. We're going to plan to update it pretty soon. Thank you.
But it would seem that the long-term trend is the increase in the frequency of extreme events. Okay? So if you look at averages, long-term averages, you may not pick up things because you might get, more rain during the dry season, for example, and less during the wet season. So when you take an annual average, you won't really pick up any difference. So it has to be broken down. But those kinds of changes, also with regard to temperature, and we had a very graphic description of the consequences of warming nights and so is mimicked. Has an implication for the engineering that I think we heard about. If you're going to get a lot of water coming down in a short period of time, the drainage, the engineering for the drainage, when you have hard structures are not resilient. More natural systems, in fact, are able to accommodate. I think that was a point that was being made. Very, very important point with regard to more green engineering, of mixing hard structures, but also maintaining resilience of natural systems as well. I think is an important aspect of how engineering is evolving. There are a lot of things, services that nature provides, which we've taken for free until we remove them, and then we realize that, wait, this didn't happen before. Okay, so again, there's a long-term trend, and there seems to be developing globally a movement towards greening and green engineering and all of the aspects associated with that, which is a very good thing. But we're constantly wrong, because science is very conservative. People are reluctant to make. They're worried that people think that you're predicting something rather than suggesting a long-term trend that we need to accommodate. So I think that we are quite correct. And this is something that I guess meetings such as this, where engineers take all of this on board, what it would imply is that it's not that there haven't been extreme events before. Okay? For example, there was mention of the 1933 hurricane in Trinidad. And that is something that people will only find out about by looking at historical records, that there was a hurricane that entered Trinidad from off the east coast and went across the south of Trinidad and Tobago, and that emerged in the Gulf of Paraguay. I wonder how many people know that. Okay? It's not impossible, but then what we're talking about is the frequency of such things will decrease. So it's not that we haven't had extreme events and floods before. That's historical. Those things always happen. So you calculate 1 in 50 or 1 in 100 and you engineer for that. But what if the historical 1 in 50 occurrence becomes 1 in 25, then 1 in 10, 1 in 5? Because that is apparently, according to the statistics, what is happening. Okay? So it has an implication for the design guidelines that engineers use. Should it be 1 in 50? Should 1 in 50 now be 1 in 25? Okay? Or shorter than that? That is what engineers have to take on board and to make the revisions to the codes in fact accommodate. It's not that extreme events haven't happened before. It's the decrease in the time frame between them is what we're looking at. So I hope that makes that clear.
Lloyd Lynch, Seismic Research Center, UE. Gentlemen, I'd like to put forward the hypothesis that a major part of the challenges of dealing with disaster management in SIDS, is that of building adequate capacity to treat with the problem. We, as small island developing states, have just not been able to create the fiscal space to treat with the problem. Most of the Caribbean islands, Trinidad being an exception, has significant debt problem. And in the case of Trinidad, in 2008, I think it was, we were written off from the list of people, or rather the list of countries that qualifies for development funding, AIDS and so on. Good. And this business of not being able to create fiscal space is actually seen in the amount of funding that we have been able to attract in the region to fund disaster management activities. I think it's more than like 60%. I don't have the exact figures, but CDEMA will be able to feel that figure, but it's a lot. Good. In the case of Trinidad, and some of the other countries too, the political culture creates significant amount of barriers.
I am so pleased that that comment was made Firstly, I want to say donor agencies have become a little bit, worrisome and tired of expending funds, and the funds have not been used for the intended purposes. And the Caribbean is no exception. In terms of climate innovative technologies, I was involved in preparing a proposal actually to the World Bank for the establishment of a climate innovative technology center. Actually, that center will be launched in Freeport on Monday. But the fact of the matter is that the way they have structured the funding is that, it's like bridging finance. As the work progresses, you get paid. You might get a little bit of money up front to establish the center, but there is constant monitoring to ensure that the funds are expended and, in fact, the objectives are achieved. So that's the first thing. I myself have had significant challenges in getting the different Caribbean countries to come together as one unit and submit a common proposal. And it is then I, got a full appreciation for the insularity that obtains in West Indian cricket, which I think is partially responsible for where we are right now. But I agree with you, it is really, really, really difficult and challenging. We can say what we want, we can preach, the importance of that unity, but that, that attitude, that approach, is difficult to achieve. Hoping that at some point in time in the future, given the efforts of CARICOM and CSME and all that, we can come closer together. We can come closer together, but it may take a serious disaster impacting not only one or two countries, but all the countries in the Caribbean, both from the north and from the south. And that may not be too far from long, given the kind of projections and forecasting that we are seeing. So that's the first point I wanted to make. If we leave it up to the politicians to get us united, I think we have another 20, 25 years waiting. It is up to each one of us in our own networks to start that relationship and to maintain that relationship. And, to reinforce the point that we are, each other's keeper. From the ODPM perspective, I was, really, really pleased to see the ODPM responding to the needs of St. Lucia and St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And it is an example of the readiness of the ODPM, at least from that perspective. Again, from a political perspective, just last week, I think it was, or this week, I see that the Ministry of Local Government, has advised some key positions with respect to disaster preparedness, which of course will be involved in the coordination of activities, not only with the Ministry of Health and the ODPM, but also other major stakeholders. So, like I said, we cannot depend or we cannot leave it up to the government and these agencies alone. We have to do our part. We have to do our part, starting from the home, starting also from the street that we are living in, at the communities, at the mosque level, at the temple level, at the church level, right? And we have to start getting, engaging those local county councillors, I forget what they call them, and the MPs involved to get this thing going. Thank you.
Sopogas Gil, I'm the Technical Officer, Division of Infrastructure, THA, to the Voice of the Assembly. Now, given the fact that we are looking at the risk of storms, etc., in creeks and so on, the fact is, over time we have had occurrences. So it would mean that we should be looking at the likelihood of when the next one would occur. In other words, we should be predicting in a more precise way so that what exists now, we should know what we're preparing for year year by year, over what period. And also look at the fact that, we're looking at, trends over time. I don't know if my point is coming across to you all there. But I think we need to be more proactive in our approach to predictions. Now, in terms of funding and all these things, I think the challenge for professionals is one of communication. The scripture telling that our life is in the power of the tongue, and they that love it shall eat the fruit thereof. In other words, our ability to communicate is where the real problem is. The issue isn't one of funding or anything like that. The money comes if you can, engage the issues in the right way. Thank you.
I think the point is well taken. It's been emphasized by various speakers that the way that I have put it was that yes, there are physical challenges, but the consequences and the impact of them varies depending on the response that you make. So if you don't do anything, if you don't manage the situation, if you don't engineer structures in anticipation of what is likely to occur, if you don't manage things, then the consequences that unfold are far greater. Okay? So there's a cost to inaction, to not doing anything. Now, Trinidad and Tobago, in my view, is a bit different from the rest of the Caribbean. The earlier question, I think that Mr. Lynch asked about, Trinidad being graduated up to suppose developed country status, okay, and then not getting funding from donors, is really not an excuse for taking the action that is required. It has more resources that than it can use sensibly, and that does not explain why Trinidad and Tobago doesn't have a national building code. I think that was a point that that was made. Those things are matters of management and of will to get those things done. That's not a matter of not having donor money to do that. So there's an inherent issue with regard to the way that our societies operate, where we seem to take a long while to make decisions to deal with things, and the consequences that then accrue are far greater than they need to be. And then we could plead that yes, we have certain intrinsic weaknesses, and because you're small, if you have a hurricane or a storm impacting on a large society, making landfall in the U.S., people can evacuate another state. But if a hurricane hits Grenada, there's no place to go. You get the full consequences. So there's an inherent sensitivity that small societies have. But that's still not an excuse for taking action and managing the situation. With regard to the trends, I think we got a good exposition of, from a meteorological point of view. See the points on the map of how many sources of data you have with regard to hydrometeorology and how that is used to make short-term prediction, 24 hours, 48 hours, and so forth. Maybe we have a problem of information flow, that maybe that information doesn't get in real time to places where it needs to get the people to take the required action. And that is a particularly acute problem in small societies. That's a different thing from what I was talking about long-term trends. That's more scientific, that is less certain. I think you were talking about, some precision.
Okay, everybody, that concludes our first technical session this morning. I'd like it if you could thank the presenters in the usual way, please. Okay, we go to lunch. I think lunch is served at the back of the room. Lunch today is sponsored by the ODPM, so you can thank them. That's fine. And we reconvene back in our seats, ready to go again at 1:30, and the technical session will be concerned with drainage. So thank you very much.